This is our 15th lesson on Introduction to the Bible, and we will continue this through the end of the year. We'll finish it, and then next year we'll start a new class. So we're looking at this time, we're looking at writing materials in the Bible, in Bible times. The reason this is important is because we can see how some writing materials are fragile and some are not so fragile, and why we've had problems with having manuscripts of the Bible. And manuscripts come from one area of the world because of the climate. So we'll lay this out as we develop this. And so the manuscripts that we'll be looking at them at all kinds of writing materials. The first one is papyrus, and we'll be looking at papyrus and vellum, and that's a skin of an animal. In fact, the vellum originally was the skin of a calf skin, and then parchment or cowhide. Parchment and wax. Wax was used, a very temporary type writing material. And wood, they wrote on wood. They wrote on clay tablets. They wrote on pottery. And some things were written on stone. The Ten Commandments was a good example of that. Both common stones and sometimes even on precious stones. Some were written on metals, lead, gold, silver, and bronze. And so we'd have them written on various metals sorts. Now, in the Bible times, some of these materials that we see here are fragile. Papyrus paper is fragile. Vellum, animal skins are fragile. Papyrus won't last near as long as an animal skin will, but the animal skin will eventually break down. And of course, depends on the climate, how quickly it'll break down. Vellum is animal skin. Parchment is also a kind of animal skin. We'll get back to that later. And then wax was very temporary. And so they would have a tablet covered with wax. They would write on it with a scribe pen, and someone would read it, and then they would kind of smooth it back over and then write again. So it was something that was very temporary. It wasn't designed to last more than maybe a few hours or so. And wood, of course, wood will deteriorate depending on the climate, of course. And cloth, the Egyptians wrote on linen cloth. Linen is a product of the flax plant, and so it's from flax plants. And some of these materials are not fragile. Clay tablets were not fragile. They would write on a clay tablet and then bake it in an oven and make it like a brick. They have discovered large numbers of clay tablet libraries in the Mideast and over in the realm of what we now know as regions of Turkey, Syria, and
call from 140
just a moment. Okay. Clay tablets. They found extensive libraries with clay tablets on them, and the clay tablets would be baked. They found them in what we know as Turkey, and even in as far as east as Afghanistan, but what is probably Turkey and Iraq, Iran, and in what we now know as those countries in that region in Syria. And so we find them in those regions. They would bake them in a kiln, and it would be hard like a brick. And so those tablets are still in good shape. And there are thousands of these that they haven't even deciphered yet. There may be some surprises in store for us. We're hoping that they may find some references to biblical characters in some of them. That could be very useful, of course, from an archaeological standpoint. But we'll just wait and see what happens. Clay tablets, pottery, they write on pottery, because material that you could write on was so expensive and so hard to get. We just don't even think anything about it. We just buy a tablet of paper, we'll write on it and just throw the paper away. But to them, it was so expensive and it had to be handmade. It was very expensive. So if they had broken pottery, they would write on the pottery, with the permanent type ink and write on pottery. We'll see some pictures of some of those. There was writing on stones. And of course, we've already seen metals. Some of these materials lasted for several thousand years, and some of them are still in good shape. Writing was done on a number of different materials. Some of them were easily destroyed. Other materials were difficult to destroy. Paper deteriorates rapidly because it's an organic material. And wood and leather deteriorate more slowly than paper, but they do deteriorate depending on the weather, the climate. Baked clay tablets, stone, pottery, and metal are relatively permanent. Of course, metal can be melted down. If it was a golden plate, it would tend to be valuable, and someone might just melt it down for the gold. Same thing with silver, but silver oxidizes, whereas gold does not. There are not very many chemicals that will mix with gold and break it down. Hydrocyanic acid, hydrogen cyanide, will break it down. And there's a few other little things that will. But what we run into then is silver then will oxidize. Oxygen will make it tarnish. And if you have silver where for eating purposes, it gets tarnished, it has to be polished. But the dingy look on it is just silver oxide. It's not going to hurt you. But silver and gold would tend to be melted down by somebody. Iron would rust and it'll oxidize, and so it'll tend to break down with time as well. Lead won't tend to deteriorate rapidly, but it's relatively soft and can be damaged. And papyrus is derived from the papyrus plant, and our English word paper comes from this word. It was derived from this. Vellum was the skin of cattle and antelopes, calf skin generally, and parchment was the sheep and goat skins. So the word vellum and parchment are now all used basically interchangeably now. But originally vellum was like veal. We think of veal. That's made from a calf, and this parchment would be from sheep and goats. But now they're pretty well used interchangeably by most people. Wax. There are several passages where it's almost certain that they used wax upon a tablet for a writing service. We'll show a passage or two where I think it has to be wax. It probably is. It would perish very quickly. And they could use such things as beeswax and stuff like that, or other types of wax. It's only used for something that isn't either intended to be permanent nor not even semi-permanent, okay? But it's wood, of course, is more permanent than paper, but it still decays with time. It'll rot and break down. Here's a picture of a papyrus plant, and it's very interesting. There's the reeds on the papyrus that go up. I'll move my mouse along one of them. It would take these stems and break them down and roll them and develop them into a paper. And it's the word biblos is derived. The Bible is derived from the Greek word biblos, which is the name for the papyrus plant. Bolton and Milligan say maybe added that biblos can still mean the papyrus plant. So it still can mean that in Greek. So it was a papyrus plant, and so that's where the term began to be used. And of course, Some of the early manuscripts were made with papyrus and made into paper. The word biblos was derived from the pith, the inner part of a papyrus plant. The pith was white in color, and Moulton Milligan, page Roman numeral VI and Roman numeral 7, in the early part of the book. Biblos, Thayer, and it's rather hey bublos, and so the upsilon instead of an iota, but the form biblos are more common with the notes of writing. So it could be either spelling. There's different spellings in English. In England, the word vapor in England is VAPOUR. In the United States, is VAPOR. So there would be a variation in the spelling here. It's from its bark, rather the cellular substance of its stem, the inside of the stem. And in the genus plant, paper was made, a written book, a roll, or scroll. That's what it referred to. Right. Any questions there? Biblion, you notice the ending is different. The first four letters are the same accent marks, different place, but the first four letters are the same. The O ending becomes eon ending. The eon ending here, iota, omicron, nu, is the diminutive, the small, tiny form of the word biblos. So it's a small book, a scroll or a small scroll, small book. And so you'll see both words in the New Testament. What we have here in itself, the papyrus is the name of the reed plant. We've already shown a picture of it, which at one time grew in great profusion in the River Nile. Give its name to the writing material or paper of antiquity formed from it. The pith, the inner part of that stem, of the stem of papyrus plant, was cut into long strips, which were laid down on a flat table and soaked in Nile water. And Moulton and Milligan. The second layer was in place crosswise. So they run in one direction, then they turn it 90 degrees and run it right crosswise with it. The two layers are pressed together to form a single web or sheet. So this is how they did it. And after being dried in the sun and scraped with a shell or a bone to remove any roughness, a material was not unlike our brown paper was produced. Again, you can see it's very expensive because it's labor intensive. They didn't have machines that would just run the paper out. They accomplished it with similar process even today, the paper mills there. So they smooth it out and squeeze it, put it under pressure. And of course, this is how they accomplish it. Here's some papyrus fragment. It's John Ryland's fragment. And if you'll notice here, all of the Greek letters are uppercase. And so this is just a piece of the book of John. It's thought to be the oldest piece of the scriptures that we have. And it's dated like 120 AD or something thereabouts. John Ryland's fragment. There's a front and back side of the road on both sides of it. So you can take that right one and turn it, rotate it 180 degrees, and it'll fit on the back side of that other. And if you look at that, you can see that. And so that's what they have. It's unfortunate they didn't have the whole book, but it's just a piece of the book of John, right? One side contains John 18, 31 through 33, but it's just parts of those verses, not all of them. The other side contains John 18, 37 through 38, and pieces of those. And it's dated about AD 120. That's pretty early. So that shows that book existed in AD 120. It's likely to be the oldest copy of a part of the New Testament in existence today. There was some excitement several years ago about some material, a book, some writing that was discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Dead Sea, in the Qumran caves, I think it was. And they found something that a couple of authorities claimed was part of the Book of Mark. And it was fragments like this. And it looked like it was maybe the Book of Mark, and this was dated about AD 70 or somewhere thereabouts, just right after the destruction of Jerusalem. And so it would have been dated, having existed when Jerusalem was destroyed. But there's some pretty good evidence that it wasn't the Book of Mark. So be careful about jumping onto something like that. Right. It's likely to be the oldest copy of any part of the New Testament in existence. The Dead Sea Scrolls are older than this. Some of them go back to about 100 BC or somewhere thereabouts. So they go back quite a ways. This manuscript, and that should be MS, is referred to as P52 in the textual apparatus. Papyrus 52, P for papyrus. And it should be MS. I'll change that on my slide later. In 2 John 1:12, John wrote with paper and ink. Having many things to write unto you, I would not write them with paper and ink. But I hope to come unto you and to speak face to face, but that your joy may be made full. So I wouldn't write them with paper and ink. And so John wrote normally with paper and ink, but he wanted to come and see them and speak face to face rather than in writing. But we see this as using a paper and ink. And so the word is cartes, and that's the word for paper. And our word card comes from this word, charta, leaf of papyrus. Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary defines it that way. So this is the word here. Incidentally, the word ink it tells us it's black. It has the word black in it. Okay. Melon. Paper or papyrus tends to become brittle and decompose as it ages. The only places where papyrus documents have been found is in places with dry climates. That would be primarily in Egypt, in that region, and so any copies of the scriptures that would have been in existence would have been destroyed by the Muslims if we're out in the desert of Arabia. So they wouldn't have tolerated it. There have been a lot of papyrus documents found in Egypt and in desert regions. So in regions of Palestine that are desert. Greek for vellum is membrana. And so the word is for a membrane. It first made of the dress skins at Pergamum. That's its name. And so we have membrana. That's a Latin word for the dress skins of animals. And Paul told Timothy, the cloak that I left at Troas with Carpus, bring when thou comest, and the books, especially the parchments. So this would have been parchments, this would have been writings on skins. Now, my interpretation of this is that the documents written on parchments were probably Old Testament scriptures, because they tended to write theirs on animal skins. And so I would guess that he may be talking about copies of the Old Testament scriptures that Paul had in his possession. And the books might have been the New Testament books. So what I call an educated guess on my part. Because vellum or animal skins are much thicker than our modern paper, and they would tend to be. I have a Bible that's pretty thin, or used to have one, and someone stole it. My son took it to Bible camp, and someone stole it and took it. I hope they read it pretty good. because they need to be reading it. Don't let's steal a Bible. That's almost uh, it's kind of ironic, okay? But it was very thin paper, and you just can't make animal skins that thin. So that posed a problem in getting your books. So they're much thicker than our modern papers. So the New Testament required 4 volumes just to get the New Testament in book form. They have them in 2 forms, a codex and a scroll. So the fourfold gospel was on one of these volumes, and the Acts and the general epistles are on another. Paul's writings, and that included Hebrews. Paul's writing plus Hebrews, and it's still a debatable question as to whether he wrote Hebrews. And then the book of Revelation was on a separate scroll, separate book. So it was in 4 codex of what we call a book, our books would be called a codex, C-O-D-E-X. Here's the Codex Sinaiticus. This one was discovered in the Sinai Peninsula. And so it's labeled Sinaiticus at a place that's called Mount Sinai, which I don't believe is the true Mount Sinai. But whatever the case, this is what it looked like. And I want you to notice it's all uppercase and there's no space between the words. I'm gonna move my mouse over. There's Chi, and so they made some of their letters different. There's Pi, Omicron, Iota, Eta, Epsilon, Eta, and then Tau, and Eta, Beta, Lambda, and this is a Sigma. This is a uppercase Sigma. That's how it was made back then. It looks like our letter C, but I won't go into it any further. Notice there's no gaps between the words, and they didn't. And when they come to the word at the end, they just put the word over to the other, right on over. And so we don't know. We have to look at it very carefully to see where the words start and end. Okay, and so that's pretty important that we keep that in mind. So it's hard for me to read that. I need to break it up. I can see Chi right there, and the word and so this is Codex Sinaiticus. That's what it looks like, the writing. I see what looks like Chi again down here. Move my mouse down, and so I think that's probably what it is. But again, I need to sit down and really study this pretty hard and try to break it up and figure out where the breaks are. Any questions? But they read it and they didn't have a problem with it because they were used to it. That's what it looked like. Here's the Vaticanus. It's in the Vatican, and this is Matthew 11:8. The last part of verse 8 and all the way through chapter 10. I'd say verse 10, first part of it. And so again, we see the writing here, and see if I can find Chi again. Chi is usually there somewhere. And move my mouse around a bit. It looks like that may be Chi right there. Right there might be. So again, it's hard for me to read this stuff. I'm used to reading the spaces between the words and also the lowercase letters rather than the unsealed uppercase letters. And let's see, right there's a Sigma. There's another Sigma. Okay. So again, there's a Tau, Iota. So we can write it out and then kind of break it up, but you really have to work at it. And that looks like the tone. That looks like the article, the definite article, tone. All right. But that's Codex Vaticanus, what it looks like. And let's look at this and see how it works here. This is that put into the Textus Receptus. But I want you to notice we go back here, we have an eta at the beginning and a mu. So let me go back. If you had Greek, yes. Oh my. Wait a minute. Oh, the first two letters are on the prior line. It should start with, see, they just wrapped it around. Because they just wrapped it around, and that's how they had to read it. So it started, the first word, letter in this word started with the feed, where my mouth is. So that's what we got. And so that's where it starts right there, starts with feed. And so it got wrapped around from the prior line. So the other first two letters of this word were actually on the page before it. Right? See how that works? And that makes it even harder to read. Right? I want you to see that. That tends to be a problem. I put this in without any diacritical markings. There weren't any in the original text. But this is what we have here. Of course, you don't have verse markings because they didn't have verses until about the time of Columbus. Chapter divisions were around 1250 AD, and they were put in. And then about a little bit after Columbus discovered America, about 1520 or somewhere thereabouts AD, the verse divisions were inserted in the Bible. So you don't see any verse divisions there. But that's it right there. Are there questions about this? Here's the Codex Alexandria. This was found in Alexandria, Egypt, northern Egypt. And it was folded over, so it's part of it's unreadable right in here. It's lost. So this is 1 Timothy 3:16. See the writing, and we can't tell whether that's an omega, an omicron, or a theta, where my mouse is moving inside that red circle. There's a sigma. That's pretty clear. It kind of looks like a C. That's pretty clear. It's a sigma. And so it could be hos, and that would be which, and it could be thos. That would be abbreviation for God. So it's hard to tell which one it is from this writing. Okay. So again, we have it down here. Again, we have the same situation, the same two letters. And this is the theta here. You can see the little line marked through it. And there's your sigma. So again, just real hard to tell what the letter is. Kind of smudged out, unfortunately. Greek names are often abbreviated. Thayer Robertson, A.T. Robertson tells us this. He gives us a list of abbreviations on pages 171 to 173 of his big grammar. That would be a grammar of Greek New Testament in light of historical research. Is the full title of A.T. Robertson. It's about 1,200 pages long. I think you might be able to obtain it in electronic format on the internet. You can probably download it. But Codex Alexandrius, the word theos is abbreviated as thos. And right here we have theta, sigma, or in that unsealed it would be theta, and the sigma at that time was written like the letter C. If you ever remember, the Russian airplanes would have a C, and look like a P to us. Well, that was the old way of writing SSS and rho or R. And so that was abbreviation for their name of their nation in Russian. And of course, the Russian Cyrillic languages was derived from the Greek letters. If the line to the middle of the letter theta is written poorly, it's misread as an omicron. And so this would be read as an omicron, say. And this makes it to read os, which, as we see in 1 Timothy 3:16, or we could have it as God, as we see, I think the King James. So we have here, and without controversy, great is the mystery of godliness. He who hosts, was manifested in the flesh, justified in the spirit, sent of angels, preached among the nations, believed on the world, received up in glory. This is another translation of it. The first one is the top one is the American Standard Version, and the bottom one is the King James Version. And so it has God was manifested in the flesh. Most of the manuscripts have those, and it will be God. So this is God was manifested in the flesh. That was the mystery, that God would be manifest. I think the King James reading is correct. And so this is abbreviation for God. Notice the difference in it. This theta could easily look like this Omicron, and could easily look like it if it just didn't have a little mark through the line. Of course, we saw that one manuscript where we couldn't tell what it was. That's an old manuscript. Doctrinal considerations. And in the prior manuscript, they're circled in red. It looks like it's either thos or os. It would be either os, Omicron sigma. Remember, that's your old writing way of writing the sigma. Or thos. This would be he who, and this would be abbreviation for God. And the only difference is a little line through there, right there. So that's the only difference in them. The Greek sigma is written like our letter C in the first century. Later, it was changed to a sigma in the Greek alphabet. Either this sigma here or this sigma here. This your uppercase. And if it's at the end of the word, it looked like this, and anywhere else in the word, it looked like this. Okay? Any questions now? So the word os, or thos, is he who, and the word thos is abbreviation. The word os, and I'll put my mouse over it. Os is he who, and thos is abbreviation for God. So it makes a difference, quite a difference in interpretation of the passage. So I think the King James is correct. Jesus is God. He was manifest in the flesh. God was in the flesh. After all, that's what called his name Emmanuel, in which by interpretation, Matthew 1 is God with us. So God was with us. And if we go back to the Alexandrian manuscript, Alexandrinus, that's Latin for Codex from Alexandria, Alexandrinus. And again, I have them listed here, the King James American Standard, the two translations. And I believe the documents from which the King James was translated are best. I think there's other sources that would go along with this. And there's that writing. And you can see it in the circle up here, red circle. It's real hard. You can't read it. And it's just a guess as to what it is. And this right here, and it's a theta. Okay. So, and does it have a bar through it or not? Hard to tell. Here's the Codex Alexandrinus, is what it looks like. It has it in 4 columns. I know some of your Bibles will have it in 2 columns. My American Standard Teacher's Edition Bible that I use, it has 2 columns. But this had 4 columns, and the text was in 4 different columns. Okay. Any questions? And there's another one that's Washington, and this is from Washington. It's somewhere in a museum in Washington, D.C., our national capital. This manuscript has a lot of variations in it compared to other manuscripts. Even if the manuscript has variations, it does speak of the existence of the scriptures at that point. Someone just corrupted them. That's what that means. And here's Mark 16, verses 12 through 17, which is claimed by some that it shouldn't exist, shouldn't be in the Bible. And that's another question. We'll not spend the time on this. If you have my Logic and Debate for Christians book, I devote an whole appendix to this question. And there's an appendix. Do we have the correct Bible? Something to that effect is the name of the appendix. And verses 12 through 17 are right here in this place. Some of the manuscripts read differently. Here's Codex Bezier, and I think this is Canterbury, from Canterbury in England, where that manuscript exists. And this is what it looks like. Okay, and so it's really got some strange stuff in it. Inserted. Here are the Dead Sea Scrolls, what they look like, fragments, of course. And so they were in the caves. This is Hebrew, of course. So this is written in Hebrew. Writing was on both sides of the vellum. And so if you take an animal skin, you'd have the side that was inside to the flesh, and then you'd have the side that was where the hair was taken out. So they had to work with it and get rid of the hair as much as they could. So one side was a flesh side, the other side was the side of the hair side. Prior to writing, the scribe would make small dots on a straight line to serve as guidelines for the scribe. I know whenever I get to writing, and I've taught in college for about 31 years. And whenever I'd write, I'd start writing with my hand, and my hand would move across, and of course it goes in an arc. When you move your hand down, you got to work at it to keep it level. Otherwise, you got to keep raising your hand up. If your hand goes out, you can swing it right now and just move it. You can see it'll go in an arc. So it will go down as it goes to the right. If you're writing from left to right, like we write. So they had these small dots. These are in your manuscripts or in your vellum manuscripts. And so you'll see those in the document. You can look carefully at the document. If you have a copy of it, you can look at it and find these little dots, little small dots. And they serve as guidelines for the scribe. Keep his line straight. Verso and recto. Recto is the other side. So we have the two sides of the manuscript. One side that used to have hair on, the other side had most of the flesh. Wax was used for writing surface, and it's thought that wax was used in Isaiah 8:1. And Jehovah, the Lord, said unto me, take thee a great tablet and write upon it with the pen of a man. And so he has a hashbar. For what we have here then is this appears to be wax. In Isaiah 30 and verse 8, now go write it before them on a tablet and inscribe it in a book. So you write it on this tablet, and then you put it in a book, and that it may be for the time to come forever and ever. So the tablet, you take it from the tablet and put it on the book. And so this is what we find here. I think it's probably a tablet of probably wax, temporary. But the book is going to be permanent. You write it in the book so it'll be permanent. The Lord, or Jehovah, answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain upon tablets, that he may run that readeth it. So write it on tablets. Of course, if we follow through like Isaiah 30 verse 8, they would eventually put it in a book. Habakkuk would. In Luke 1:63, John the Baptist's mother and father were going to name him. And so whenever they're going to name him, they had already decided his name was to be John. God had told them to name him John. All right, but we won't get into the study of what John means. But of course, he wasn't, Zechariah wasn't able to speak because of his unbelief at first. And so he had to write on a writing tablet, and he wrote it saying his name is John, and they marveled all of them. So he could understand, but he couldn't speak. After this, he was able to speak again. Now, we have writing on wooden objects. Now go write it before them on a tablet and inscribe it in a book. It may be for the time to come forever and ever. The wooden object probably was a piece of wood that had wax on it. That's what it appears to be here. Right? Same thing with Habakkuk 2:2. So I think this was probably a tablet, according to Brown Driver Briggs. He sent his Hebrew and Chaldean lexicon is a board or plank or plate or wooden boards. That's probably what it was. It was a wooden board with wax on it so they could write on it. Temporary thing. Of course, you could write it with ink on wood as well if the wood is nice and smooth. Other wooden surfaces, ancient people wrote on leaves, tree bark, and pieces of wood. The Muslims claim that the Quran, and I spell it, they're spelled two different ways, was written on leaves, tree bark, and other surfaces before it was finally written down, copied down. That's their claim. Ancient people also wrote on other surfaces. They wrote on ivory, for example, or animal horns or antlers, or virtually anything that was available, they'd write on it. You make a carving in it. And I've seen people would carve their initials in a tree, for example. So this would happen. Now we have two basic types of books in the history of the scriptures: scrolls, and then there's codices. Here's the scroll. It's much like our roll of paper towel roll. This rolls out. We tear it off, but they would roll it up from one side to the other. If it's Hebrew, it would move it from what we see on the right side to the left. So Hebrew would read from right to left instead of left to right, like our European languages, English included. So they would have, we'll get a picture of one in just a minute that'll help us to see. Notice here, if you will, and I'll move my mouse around a bit. The scrolls over here had this right in here, and here to guide to keep it from sliding around. And it was like a shaft that went through, a wooden shaft that went through. So the scribe would take his hand and hold this side, put his hand right here, left hand on this, and his right hand on this other one down here. And he could roll that and read it. And of course, it read from right to left. But that's how the scroll would work. And of course, the weight of that scroll would be the limitation, the size of it. If it got too heavy, the scribe just couldn't keep holding it for a long time while he was reading. It's too much. So whenever the Old Testament was translated into Greek has all the vowels and consonants and as letters, and it also, Hebrew only has consonants. And so Hebrew is much more complicated or complex. It's a less complicated language, and it's very compact. It's more compact. Doesn't take as much space as a language that would have your vowels in it. So they had to split the books of Samuel Kings and Chronicles up into two books. That's why they did it, because the scroll just got too big. Any questions? These are Hebrew scrolls right here, what they are. The Torah, the Law of Moses scrolls. Here's a codex, like what we think of as a book. This is it's a word that would describe what we call a book, what the book looks like to us. Of Codices that came later. Yeah, the very first ones were on scrolls like this. Here's a Roman writing tablet, and they could write on it. And I know whenever I was younger, they talked about having little tablets that were like slate tablets. You could write like a little chalkboard, write on it. But I never did use one. My schooling started in 1949, formal schooling. So they were using that quite some time before they quit using that. So this would be a Roman tablet, and so they could write and put their lesson on this and write it out, turn the pages, and that's what it looked like. Pretty cumbersome. Writing materials in Bible times were papyrus, vellum, parchment. Now vellum and parchment are used interchangeably. Both of them are animal skins. Wax, wood, clay tablets. We'll look at those a little bit later. We haven't done clay tablets in here yet. And then there was in Bible time. Pottery, stone, most common and precious stones, all sorts of metals. Some of these materials were fragile, some were relatively permanent, and some fragile writing materials were preserved by the dry climate sometimes. As a background to this, there was a series of false doctrines. Gnosticism began to creep into the church, and the Gnostics had a wrong view of the deity of Jesus. And so they began to, I believe, change some of the writings of the manuscripts. Like there in the passage in 2 Timothy 3, and what we see, 1 Timothy 3, I'm sorry, where we see it. We have hosts, and hosts. Those two right there in that passage in 3:16. And so I think there was evidence that they began to try to modify the text of the Bible itself. And so these old manuscripts have been corrupted by the Gnostics. I'm convinced in my mind. And that's why. And so they'll go back and say, well, that's an old manuscript. That's how it reads. But there are old manuscripts that don't read that way. And so you need to be aware of that. And again, age doesn't necessarily mean it's a good quality manuscript. All right. Are there questions?